So, a few people have asked me if I'm going to do a review of the latest Planet of the Apes movie, and I didn't want to, but I'm gonna because of popular demand, which I think is about 3 people, maybe. First of all, I want to talk about something that every critic, pretty well that I read on the topic of this movie, said that just drives me up the friggin' wall, which is, most people like it, but they'll say, they like it if you can bracket out the inherent absurdity of the idea. You see this mentioned in connection to the first movie, the series, and this recent film. That, they're great movies as long as you can swallow the silliness of the premise. If you make a comment like that, you've missed the point of the friggin' movies. The whole point of them, I shouldn't say the whole point, but one of the things about them that's supposed to be unsettling is that there's nothing intrinsically or inherently more absurd about a bunch of ape hunters standing over a pile of dead humans and getting their picture taken than there is of that exact same scenario, only inverted. G.K. Chesterton talks about this in his book Orthodoxy. Chesterton discusses how in fairyland, as opposed to in the modern scientific approach to things, there's a realization that causes are not inherently linked to their effects. For example, apples don't need to be red. They could be golden. It's only this sort of deterministic attitude we have in our modern society, which is sort of predicated on Cartesian rationalism and so on and so forth, that says that it's an inherent law that trees must, bring forth red or green apples alone. And in fact, for him, the fact that fairy tales remind us of this also reminds us that the fact that apples are red is an act of will. It's a miracle. Someone chose for them to be that way. They didn't have to be that way, which he believes points ultimately back to the reality of God. So, of course, in fairyland, not only is it that apples aren't necessarily red or green, they can also be golden. Not only is it that godmothers can be fairies, and old women in the woods can also be witches, and so on and so forth. As we all know, animals can also house and their bodies can be inhabited by rational, intelligent souls that we can interact with. I mean, this is famous. What fairy tales are most known for. This is why the Genesis account is accused of being a fairy tale, because it features a talking snake. Well, what that's reflecting is that humans may be rational animals, but this isn't a natural, necessary law of the universe, that we can be the only ones who are rational. And in fact, it could have been somebody else. And this is exactly what Planet of the Apes is hitting upon. Chesterton also sort of talks about this, and how you can take the mythology and reinterpret it in a Christian framework, which is exactly what someone like St. Francis of Assisi did. He has a really great sentence at one point. He says that for St. Francis and in his mythology, the trees themselves would have really walked in Macbeth. Now, I don't know of any scholar who will back me up on this, but I'm convinced that that's the passage that inspired a lot of Prince Caspian. In that book, you'll remember that people have denied for centuries that there were ever talking animals in Narnia. There was such a thing as magic or Aslan. But as soon as that spell is broken, the trees get up and walk and come to life. The thing that's interesting in that book is he talks a lot about what it would take for animals to really have rationality. The smarter and wiser an animal is, the more it's been blessed by Aslan, the bigger it usually gets, the more rational it gets. I mean, it physically will grow normally and develop various personalities. And this even goes right down to animals that don't really have rationality just yet, such as mice. In the first book, Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, mice couldn't speak, but they still showed generosity and kindness to Aslan by chewing through his ropes after he had been killed, and as a result he blessed them with the power of speech, and apparently bigger bodies. And of course we have Reepicheep as the example of that. Conversely, there are a few passages in there that speculate about what would happen if humans gave up their rationality, and essentially became beasts in human form. This is speculated on when they have to kill a wolf and are told that it's alright to kill the wolf because the wolf probably could not speak. And again, in Lewis's view, this would mean it was not a rational being. That's why it's okay to kill them and eat them. But this could also conceivably happen to a human, and of course Lewis wrote a whole book on this called The Abolition of Man. The Planet of the Apes myth is exploring how that could possibly happen. What would it take for us to lose this gift of rationality and for another species essentially to pick it up? This all, of course, got started in the book, the original novel by Pierre Boulle. You can see there. And in the book, he explains how it is that the human race fell. And of course, this is exactly what is depicted in this recent film, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, which takes a very different line on that than the original movie series, and especially the Rise of the Apes as depicted in Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Here's how Boole's original vision went down. Now, with that in mind, let's turn our attention to the film in question. Mentioned before, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. That one, and all of those original films, reflected racial consciousness in America at the time. There was obviously a metaphor, about the Black Power movement, etc., as embodied by the apes, who were taken to be slaves for the predominantly white society in the West. This movie reflects more so our fear and paranoia about our scientific capabilities. And this has been, this kind of Frankenstein complex has been in a lot of the popular media lately. Splice comes to mind, for example. But on the other hand, there is a little bit of Boole's original vision in here. What happens in the movie, if you don't know, is that James Franco is a scientist trying to develop a cure for Alzheimer's because his father played in a tragically beautiful performance by John Lithgow. He is really, really good. The acting in this movie it's pretty good. It's very serviceable, but John Lithgow really is outstanding in this film. Really tugs at you. But he's a former, Lithgow is to say, is a former music teacher who loves to quote Shakespeare, but he's losing his memory. He can't play music anymore. I think this is probably, in some ways, I may be reading too much into this, but this is kind of a metaphor for how we as a society, as a race, as a culture, whatever, as a planet maybe, are losing higher culture, are losing a sense of beauty. Not to mention common courtesy. In the course of experimenting with this, James Franco essentially creates a super intelligent ape named Caesar by his father, by the way, while quoting Shakespeare. And there's a scene in which Caesar witnesses John Lithgow, who, by the way, is beginning to be cured. This cure that Franco's developed actually does work on humans, but not permanently. So he starts to regress back into being an amnesiac, essentially. This leads him to have a nasty run-in with a neighbor who starts to basically abuse Lithgow. Caesar sees this and rushes to his defense, because Lithgow is so kind to Caesar. He's so good to Caesar. Again, common courtesy, which is not reflected by this douchebag neighbor. But because Caesar attacks this guy, he has to be taken to, an animal sanctuary of sorts, where he's basically treated like crap. The kid who played that Drake kid in the Harry Potter movies plays Dodge Langdon, reference to the original film there, who is a huge jerk. He's essentially a jailer who tortures and torments the apes. He is a douchebag. He's the anti-John Lithgow in this movie. And that's who's really, you kind of see the changing of the guard, At first, Caesar's exposure is to a really cultured person, now it's to a person who utterly lacks culture and decency at all. And sadly, I think that's much more what our culture is kind of represented by, is people like this Dodge Langdon. What ends up eventually happening is Caesar leads a revolution. It's very much a prison break movie, actually, which makes sense if you know the previous film that the director had made. Leads a revolution against the humans, which is, people talk about how absurd it is. I hope my point's been made on that front. And the interesting thing is it sort of implies how the humans fall. That same neighbor who Caesar earlier attacked essentially gets a virus that was created by the experimentation with the medicine that's supposed to cure Alzheimer's, which humans are not immune to. The ape's immune system is much stronger, so we can handle it, but we're not. So this douchebag neighbor who was really tearing into John Lithgow earlier, so again you see another douchebag, another kind of selfish jerk. He gets it, and we reveal at the very end that he's a pilot. And during the closing credits, it sort of shows the trajectory of the virus that he's carrying all over the world. And the implication would be that it's weakening the human race. It's going to kill a lot of us off, thus leaving us easy prey for the Planet of the Apes. I think that's a really interesting theme. This movie can be seen, I think, and I may be reading too much into it, but as a call back to the higher culture, to the classical virtues, to the kind of stuff that classical education was dedicated to sort of inculcating in people, that people like Mortimer Adler were trying to resurrect in the Great Book series. And on that level, I really enjoyed the movie. I will also say it is littered with, just on a personal level, I enjoyed the crap out of it. It's littered with a bunch of, like, references, both to the original movie and just, to all the other movies. It's really a geek movie. It's a movie made by the fans. And I have been geeking out so much on Planet of the Apes lately that if it had been a bad movie, I would have hated it. Same with Planet of the Apes, Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace is just a kind of a bad movie, but everyone was so stoked that everyone hated it. Same with Batman and Robin. On the other hand, if it had been a good movie, I would have loved it, and it was a really good movie, and so I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it to anybody. Very satisfying. CGI is surprisingly good, and like I said, the acting is perfectly fine. Great summer movie. Great way to end off the summer. So that's my review of Planet of the Apes, or I guess Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I don't know what to add, so take care.